Welcome everyone and thanks for joining me today. For the next few minutes, I want to explore a simple idea that has the potential to dramatically improve your mental health, emotional stability, and overall quality of life. Most people spend a tremendous amount of energy forcing things, forcing relationships, forcing outcomes, forcing success, and sometimes even forcing happiness. But what if many of the struggles we experience are not coming from life itself, but from our resistance to how life naturally unfolds? Today, we're going to examine 10 powerful lessons that can help you develop greater inner peace, reduce unnecessary stress, and build a calmer, stronger mind. These principles are practical, evidence-based, and immediately applicable to everyday life. So let's begin. One of the most important shifts a person can make for improving mental well-being is learning to stop fighting reality. Most people assume that stress comes from difficult circumstances, but when you examine the nervous system closely, a significant portion of stress actually comes from the gap between what is happening and what we believe should be happening. The brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. It constantly generates expectations about people, situations, outcomes, and the future. When reality matches those expectations, the nervous system tends to remain stable. When reality violates those expectations, the brain interprets that mismatch as uncertainty, and uncertainty often triggers stress responses. This is why two people can experience the exact same event and have completely different emotional reactions. One person sees a setback and immediately begins resisting it mentally, replaying what should have happened, what could have happened, and what they wish had happened. The other person acknowledges the setback, accepts it as reality, and immediately begins focusing on what can be done next. The external event is identical, but the internal response is completely different. What is fascinating from a psychological perspective is that resistance often consumes more energy than the actual challenge itself. When you repeatedly argue with reality in your mind, you create a loop of mental friction. That friction keeps stress hormones elevated, narrows attention, and reduces cognitive flexibility. In practical terms, it becomes harder to think clearly, solve problems effectively, and make rational decisions. Many people misunderstand acceptance. They hear the word acceptance and assume it means surrender, weakness, or passivity. But acceptance is none of those things. Acceptance simply means recognizing reality accurately before deciding how to respond. In fact, acceptance is often the first step toward effective action. You cannot solve a problem clearly if you refuse to acknowledge that it exists. Consider how often people force situations that are providing clear signals that something is wrong. A relationship that continuously drains emotional energy. A career path that no longer aligns with personal values. A friendship built entirely on one-sided effort. In many cases, the individual is not responding to reality itself. They are responding to an imagined version of reality they wish existed. The brain becomes attached to expectations because expectations provide a sense of certainty. The challenge is that certainty is often an illusion. Life is dynamic, circumstances change, people change, goals evolve. Yet many individuals continue investing energy into preserving an outdated expectation rather than adapting to what is actually happening. Adaptation is one of the most remarkable capacities of the human nervous system. The brain is designed to learn, adjust, and reorganize itself in response to changing conditions. But adaptation can only occur when accurate information is accepted. If you constantly deny reality, distort reality, or resist reality, you interfere with the brain's natural ability to adapt. Think about moments in your life when you experience prolonged frustration. Often the frustration was not caused solely by the event itself. It was amplified by the belief that the event should not be happening. The mind repeatedly returned to the discrepancy between expectation and reality. This cycle consumes attention, emotional resources, and mental bandwidth. There is also a performance component to this. People frequently believe that forcing something harder will improve outcomes. Sometimes effort is necessary. Discipline is necessary. But force and effort are not the same thing. Effort involves directing energy toward meaningful action. Force involves trying to control variables that are outside your influence. When individuals become excessively attached to a particular outcome, they often experience a narrowing of perspective. They stop seeing alternative opportunities, alternative solutions, and alternative paths forward. Their attention becomes locked onto a single desired result. Ironically, this rigid focus often reduces the probability of success because flexibility is one of the key features of effective problem solving. There is tremendous psychological freedom in recognizing that reality does not owe us agreement with our plans. The world is not required to follow our timelines. Other people are not obligated to meet our expectations. Circumstances are not obligated to unfold according to our preferences. Once that becomes clear, something interesting happens. Energy that was previously invested in resistance becomes available for observation, learning, and action. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" the mind begins asking, "What can I do with this situation?" That question immediately shifts attention toward possibility and agency. The individuals who demonstrate the greatest resilience are rarely those who experience the fewest difficulties. They are often the people who develop the ability to face reality without emotional collapse. They acknowledge facts quickly. They adapt quickly. They adjust their behavior quickly. They do not waste excessive energy wishing reality were different before deciding how to move forward. Ultimately, peace emerges not because life becomes easier, but because the mind becomes less dependent on controlling every outcome. The nervous system functions more efficiently when it stops fighting circumstances that already exist. Clarity improves. Emotional stability improves. Decision-making improves. And perhaps most importantly, a person develops the capacity to move through challenges with a sense of calm focus rather than constant internal conflict. That is where genuine strength begins, not in controlling reality, but in learning how to work with it. One of the most valuable skills a person can develop is the ability to distinguish between what they can control and what they cannot. At first glance, this sounds simple. Most people would agree with the idea intellectually, but in practice, a significant amount of stress, anxiety, frustration, and emotional exhaustion comes from investing mental energy in things that exist outside of our sphere of influence. If you examine the way the brain operates under conditions of uncertainty, you'll find that it naturally seeks control. Control provides predictability, and predictability allows the nervous system to conserve energy. When the brain can accurately predict outcomes, it feels safer. When outcomes become uncertain, the brain increases vigilance, attention, and stress responses in an attempt to regain a sense of certainty. The problem is that many aspects of life are inherently uncertain. Other people's opinions are uncertain. Economic conditions are uncertain. Relationships involve uncertainty. Career advancement contains uncertainty. Even health, despite our best efforts, contains elements that remain outside complete control. Yet many individuals spend enormous amounts of time mentally rehearsing scenarios they cannot influence. They replay conversations that already happened. They worry about how others perceive them. They become preoccupied with future events that may never occur. From a biological perspective, the brain often reacts to these imagined threats in a manner similar to real threats. Stress hormones increase. Heart rate changes, attention narrows. The body prepares for action even when no immediate action is possible. This creates a fascinating paradox. The mind attempts to gain control by thinking more, but excessive thinking frequently produces the opposite result. Instead of creating clarity, it creates confusion. Instead of generating solutions, it generates rumination. Instead of reducing uncertainty, it amplifies awareness of uncertainty. One useful framework is to separate life into two categories. The first category contains things you can directly influence: your effort, your habits, your daily behaviors, your responses to challenges, your willingness to learn, your character, your discipline. The second category contains things you cannot fully control: outcomes, other people's reactions, external events, timing, luck, market conditions, the past. The quality of your life often depends on where your attention spends most of its time. When attention is directed toward controllable variables, people generally experience greater confidence and stability. Confidence is not generated by guaranteeing success. Confidence emerges from repeated evidence that you can take meaningful action regardless of circumstances. Every time you follow through on a commitment, complete a difficult task, or act according to your values, you strengthen the neural circuits associated with self-efficacy. You teach your brain that action is available even when certainty is not. In contrast, when attention becomes trapped by uncontrollable variables, helplessness often emerges. The individual feels stuck because they are focusing on factors they cannot directly change. This can create chronic frustration because the mind continually searches for solutions where none exist. Consider a common example. Someone posts a project online, starts a business, applies for a job, or shares creative work with others. Their effort is within their control. The quality of preparation is within their control. Their willingness to improve is within their control. But public reception is not fully within their control. If they become emotionally attached to how others respond, their emotional state becomes dependent on variables they cannot manage. Every compliment creates a temporary high. Every criticism creates a temporary low. Their psychological stability becomes outsourced to the external world. There is another important reason why focusing on controllable factors improves performance. Attention is a limited resource. The brain can only process a certain amount of information at any given moment. When mental energy is consumed by worries about outcomes, less energy remains available for the process itself. Elite performers across many domains often display this principle. They focus intensely on execution rather than prediction. They concentrate on the next action rather than the final result. This approach allows the nervous system to remain engaged with the present moment rather than becoming overwhelmed by distant possibilities. Interestingly, the desire to control outcomes often stems from fear. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of disappointment, fear of uncertainty. These fears are normal aspects of human psychology, but attempting to eliminate uncertainty completely is impossible. Life continually presents variables that remain beyond prediction. What becomes possible, however, is learning to tolerate uncertainty while maintaining effective action. This is where resilience develops. Resilience is not the absence of stress. It is the capacity to function effectively despite uncertainty. When individuals shift their attention toward controllable actions, they create a powerful psychological effect. They move from passive observation to active participation. They stop asking whether conditions are perfect and begin asking what can be done right now. This change may seem subtle, but it fundamentally alters how the brain interprets challenges. Instead of seeing obstacles as evidence of limitation, the mind begins viewing them as opportunities for adaptation. Instead of waiting for certainty before acting, a person learns to act despite uncertainty. Instead of demanding guarantees, they focus on effort. Over time, this practice creates a profound sense of inner freedom, not because life becomes predictable, but because emotional stability is no longer dependent on prediction. The individual recognizes that while they cannot control every event, they can always influence their response. And in many situations, that response becomes the single most important factor determining both performance and peace of mind. One of the most overlooked sources of psychological stress is the tendency to force timing. Human beings naturally want progress to occur according to their preferred schedule. We want results quickly. We want certainty immediately. We want relationships to develop without setbacks, careers to advance without delays, and goals to materialize as soon as effort is applied. But there is a fundamental mismatch between how we often expect life to unfold and how growth actually occurs. The brain is designed to seek rewards. When we set a goal, the nervous system begins anticipating the satisfaction associated with achieving it. This anticipation can be useful because it increases motivation and directs attention toward meaningful action. However, problems arise when the mind becomes attached not only to the goal itself, but also to a specific timeline. The moment we decide that success must happen by a certain date or that a particular outcome must arrive immediately, we create a potential source of frustration. What is interesting from a neuroscience perspective is that anticipation and expectation are not identical processes. Anticipation can energize behavior. Expectation, when rigidly held, can create disappointment. When reality unfolds differently than expected, the brain experiences what researchers often describe as a prediction error. The larger the gap between expectation and reality, the stronger the emotional reaction tends to be. This helps explain why delays can feel so emotionally taxing. A delay is often interpreted not as a neutral event, but as evidence that something is wrong. People begin questioning themselves. They question their abilities, their decisions, their future. In many cases, the challenge is not the delay itself. The challenge is the meaning attached to the delay. Consider how often people compare their progress to others. Social comparison has become increasingly common because we are constantly exposed to carefully selected snapshots of other people's lives. Someone else appears to be succeeding faster. Someone else seems to have achieved the relationship, career, lifestyle, or financial outcome we desire. The brain naturally notices these differences and begins constructing stories about what they mean. The problem is that comparison rarely provides complete information. You see outcomes without seeing the years of preparation behind them. You see achievements without seeing failures. You see the visible result without understanding the invisible process that produced it. Growth rarely follows a straight line. Most meaningful forms of development occur through periods of apparent stagnation followed by sudden improvement. This pattern is visible across many domains. Physical fitness develops this way. Skill acquisition develops this way. Emotional resilience develops this way. Even learning itself often involves long periods where progress appears minimal before noticeable breakthroughs occur. The nervous system adapts through repetition. Small changes accumulate beneath conscious awareness. Then at some point, those accumulated changes become visible. The challenge is that most people evaluate progress too frequently. They examine their circumstances day by day and become discouraged because transformation is difficult to detect in the short term. Imagine planting a seed and digging it up every morning to check whether it is growing. The constant inspection would not accelerate development. In fact, it would interfere with it. Yet many individuals approach personal growth in precisely this way. They continuously evaluate, judge, and question the process instead of allowing the process to work. Patience is often misunderstood as passive waiting. In reality, patience is active engagement without emotional desperation. It involves continuing to take meaningful action even when immediate results are absent. It means trusting that effort and adaptation are occurring beneath the surface, even when visible evidence is limited. There is also a biological component to why forcing timing can be counterproductive. Chronic urgency keeps the body in a heightened state of arousal. Stress hormones remain elevated. Attention becomes narrowly focused on immediate outcomes. Decision-making becomes reactive rather than strategic. In this state, people are more likely to make impulsive choices, abandon effective plans prematurely, or pursue short-term relief at the expense of long-term progress. When individuals learn to tolerate delayed gratification, something remarkable happens. The brain begins shifting its focus away from outcomes and toward behaviors. Satisfaction becomes linked to the process rather than exclusively to the result. This is an important transition because behaviors are controllable while outcomes often involve factors beyond our influence. Think about any significant achievement in life, whether it involves building a career, developing expertise, strengthening relationships, improving health, or cultivating emotional stability. Meaningful progress requires time. Not because time itself creates growth, but because growth depends on repeated experiences that cannot be compressed indefinitely. The desire to force timing often reflects an attempt to eliminate uncertainty. If success could happen immediately, uncertainty would disappear. If answers arrived instantly, doubt would vanish. If progress occurred overnight, frustration would cease. But uncertainty is part of every meaningful pursuit. Learning to coexist with uncertainty is one of the defining characteristics of mature psychological functioning. People who develop lasting resilience tend to understand that timing is rarely entirely under their control. They focus intensely on preparation, effort, and consistency while remaining flexible about when results will appear. They recognize that opportunities often emerge from periods that initially seemed unproductive. They understand that setbacks frequently provide information necessary for future success. As a result, they experience less emotional turbulence when progress slows. They do not interpret every delay as failure. They do not assume that every obstacle represents a dead end. Instead, they view challenges as part of a larger process of adaptation. This perspective allows them to remain engaged, motivated, and emotionally stable even when outcomes arrive more slowly than expected. In many cases, that ability to remain steady during uncertainty becomes one of the greatest advantages a person can possess. One of the most powerful mental skills a person can develop is the ability to remain deeply committed to effort while becoming less emotionally attached to outcomes. At first, this idea can seem counterintuitive. Many people believe that strong attachment to a result is necessary for motivation. They assume that if they stop obsessing over a specific outcome, they will become less ambitious, less disciplined, or less driven. In reality, the opposite is often true. When the brain becomes excessively attached to an outcome, it creates a fragile motivational structure. The individual feels good only when progress appears obvious and feels discouraged whenever progress slows. Their emotional state becomes dependent on external feedback. As a result, consistency suffers because motivation rises and falls according to circumstances rather than values or habits. There is an important distinction between commitment and attachment. Commitment is directed toward action. Attachment is directed toward results. Commitment asks, "What can I do today?" Attachment asks, "Have I achieved what I wanted yet?" Commitment keeps attention on the process. Attachment repeatedly pulls attention toward the future. From a psychological perspective, excessive attachment often creates anxiety because outcomes are never completely under our control. No matter how talented, disciplined, or prepared a person may be, there will always be external variables influencing the final result. Other people's decisions, unexpected events, changing circumstances, timing, and countless factors outside our awareness can influence outcomes. The nervous system responds poorly when it attempts to control variables that cannot be controlled. The brain continuously monitors for signs of uncertainty, and when uncertainty becomes associated with something we desperately want, emotional tension increases. Thoughts become repetitive, attention narrows, stress levels rise. Instead of improving performance, attachment often interferes with it. This becomes particularly evident in high-pressure situations. Athletes frequently perform below their capabilities when they become overly focused on winning rather than executing the behaviors that increase the likelihood of winning. Students sometimes perform worse on important examinations when they focus entirely on grades rather than the knowledge and skills required to answer questions effectively. Professionals often experience similar effects when they become consumed by outcomes rather than the quality of their work. The reason is relatively straightforward. Attention is one of the brain's most valuable resources. When attention is directed toward future outcomes, less attention remains available for present moment execution. Performance depends on the ability to engage fully with the task at hand. When the mind continually drifts toward questions about success or failure, it disrupts concentration and reduces efficiency. Detachment does not mean lowering standards. It does not mean abandoning goals. It does not mean becoming indifferent to success. Instead, it means recognizing that the most productive use of attention is usually directed toward behaviors rather than results. Goals provide direction, but behaviors create progress. There is also a significant emotional benefit to this approach. When individuals become detached from outcomes, they often experience greater stability during periods of uncertainty. Their mood no longer fluctuates dramatically based on temporary setbacks or short-term feedback. They develop a stronger internal reference point because satisfaction comes from effort, growth, and consistency, rather than external validation. Many people unknowingly place their emotional well-being at the mercy of circumstances. They tell themselves they will feel successful once they reach a certain milestone. They will feel confident once they receive recognition. They will feel worthy once they achieve a particular result. The problem is that these conditions continuously move. Once one goal is achieved, another immediately appears. The brain is naturally oriented toward future rewards. This tendency has evolutionary advantages because it encourages progress and adaptation. However, if left unchecked, it can create a perpetual sense of incompleteness. The individual becomes trapped in a cycle where happiness is always delayed until the next achievement. Detachment interrupts this cycle. It allows a person to pursue ambitious goals while remaining psychologically grounded in the present. It creates space for appreciation of progress rather than fixation on distance remaining. It reduces the emotional burden associated with uncertainty. Another important aspect of detachment involves relationships. Many people attempt to force connections, approval, or acceptance from others. They become attached to how they are perceived. They invest significant energy trying to influence opinions that may never change. This often produces frustration because human behavior is influenced by countless variables beyond our control. When a person learns to detach from external validation, relationships often become healthier. Interactions become less transactional. Communication becomes more authentic. Decisions become more aligned with personal values rather than fear of rejection. Emotional energy previously spent managing perceptions becomes available for genuine connection. Detachment also strengthens resilience in the face of setbacks. Every meaningful pursuit contains obstacles. Failure, disappointment, criticism, and uncertainty are unavoidable components of growth. Individuals who are strongly attached to outcomes often interpret setbacks as evidence that something is fundamentally wrong. They become discouraged because their emotional investment is concentrated entirely on the result. In contrast, individuals who focus on effort tend to view setbacks differently. They see feedback rather than catastrophe. They look for lessons rather than confirmation of inadequacy. Because their identity is connected to the process of improvement rather than a specific outcome, they recover more quickly and continue moving forward. Over time, this mindset creates a profound sense of inner freedom. A person still works hard, they still pursue excellence, they still set challenging goals, but they no longer carry the constant psychological pressure of needing every outcome to unfold exactly as planned. They understand that their responsibility is to prepare, learn, adapt, and act with integrity. The results matter, but they are not the sole determinant of peace, confidence, or self-worth. That realization transforms the way challenges are experienced and creates a level of mental clarity that allows performance and well-being to coexist rather than compete with one another. As we've discussed, inner peace is not something that appears when life becomes perfect. It emerges when you learn to focus your energy on what you can control, let go of what you cannot, and stop forcing outcomes that are outside your influence. The goal is not to become passive. The goal is to become effective, acting with intention, patience, and clarity while remaining grounded regardless of circumstances. If you found value in today's discussion, take one principle from this video and begin applying it immediately. Small changes in mindset, repeated consistently, can create profound changes in how you think, feel, and perform. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.